Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to VMware NetSec. This is the second show, and we're going to be talking live about, well, like I said in the very first show, everything about NSX, everything about HCX, everything about automation, you name it, VMC and AWS, all of these different things that we can do, we talk about here on this show. We talk about it live. We bring in subject matter experts. We do live demos. We take questions from you live on the air, and we try to get you feeling comfortable with all of these different technologies that VMware has to offer. Now, today, we're focusing all on automation, and I am very, very lucky that I got one of my favorite people in VMware to join me. I got Tomas with me, and we're going to bring him in right now. So, how's it going, Tomas? How you doing?
Hi, great. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all.
Excellent. So, Tomas, I like to start off all of these things with tell us a little bit about you. So, please tell me about you. I have my notes here that I'm going to be checking down, but tell us about your journey in VMware. What do you do? What products do you
Yeah,
work on?
sure.
Tell us all about it.
Sure. So I joined VMware 9 years ago, freshly out of my studies. So I had studied basically networking, security, and then after a few internship, I joined VMware. And at the time, it was in France. You can hear it from the accent. The start of NSX, like basically like the before me there was one guy covering the entire Europe for NSX because it was very very new, and then I was the second guy, and then the team changed to like I think there are probably 10, 20 guys now, between 10 and 20 guys and girls working on NSX. And so at the time I was a technical specialist on NSX, so I helped the customers. I was the junior of the group, and basically we went to see the different customers, to pitch NSX, to talk about what we're going to talk now, like the benefits, the automation, but also how it inserted into the network. So I did 4 years working on that. So different customers, started with the small one, went to some more complex environments. And after that, I took the opportunity to join the business unit and to work as a product manager for automation. And that's where I'm still today. I'm doing a few additional things related to automation, like we multi-tenancy. We'll probably discuss about that. Extended the tooling, which goes with the automation, but everything around consumption for this big use case, which is automation.
So you've been around for quite a while, as you indicated. So, like, in your journey of doing all this, what has been the most exciting thing that you've seen over the years of watching NSX evolve?
Well, I think it's very interesting to see how that was very, very new, sometimes very exotic to some customers, to some team like 9 years ago. And basically now it's very common, like NSX is part of the standards in many environments. I would say in most environments, everyone knows NSX, then they know the network virtualization. I think that we've went like really past the why. Why do we do that? To now, how can I take the most advantage of it? How can I really take the full benefits by automating? What are the best tools to do that? How can I empower my users to use that and not rely, let's say, on third party or ticketing system, that type of things. And so, what has been interesting is, yeah, starting for something which is like pitching a new exotic technology from Silicon Valley to something which is now very common. And in the consumption of networking and security, we've seen this change both in the public cloud, like typically when you the way you configure networking and security, but now in the private cloud and in the data center as well. And I think that's yeah, that has been very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's been a very interesting thing. And you know what? Actually, this wasn't even going to be my first question, but I feel like you kind of dropped in on it. So I'm going to go ahead and bring it up right now. Why automation? Why are we doing all this? Like, why is the industry changing from going from CLI based and going GUI based and a lot of these things that we were doing for the last 15, 20, 30 years to now you hear every product has automation, it has something to do with that. But why? Why? What's the big hype about it?
Well, I think at the end, the goal is not to do networking or simply to do security, but it's to provide something to basically deliver application, to deliver value to the end customer, and do it, of course, in a way which is secured and in a way where people can connect and can access that. And so, really, the question is, what is the pace at which you can bring the application, and how you can provide resources to your developers, to your consumers, in order to run that. And if we go at the very beginning, since we've shown that I've been in that for quite a while, well, the first Nicira value proposition, Nicira is the company which was used to acquire NSX, was really around automation. The pitch was, you can go to provision very fast a VM. You can see it on this public clouds which are developing that it goes very fast to create an architecture, but how fast can you go to create the networking to back it? How fast can you go to create the security to back it, the services around? Because you go only as fast as the last piece of the infrastructure. Like if the load balancing is taking like I don't know 8 weeks after you've provisioned the rest of the application, you didn't even if all the rest is very optimized, you didn't optimize the entire chain. And so the value of NSX, but that extended to the entire market, and I would agree with that. That everyone now presents an API. Everyone wants to offer automation on their services. Is how fast can I do that? And then the value add of NSX in that is to offer not only an API for one networking or one security product, but to offer a full-fledged platform with all the different services integrated also with the virtualization stack, integrated with the Kubernetes stack in order to provision the application. That's the value add of this use case. And that I think is one of the very major use cases of networking virtualization.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you. We've had many a conversation this one on one, and you know, when I was back being a customer, when I was out there as a consultant, I think the number one thing is the complaint was operations and the infrastructure team could never seem to keep up with the demand of the development teams. They wanted to deploy as quickly as possible, and you have your bleeding edge ones that are out there that were using containers and microservices and taking their monolith applications out there. You had ones that needed to provision new VMs to be able to expand their workloads, and because they're getting increased demand, the application's becoming popular. But there was nothing worse than having the infrastructure team blamed because it was taking 6 to 8 weeks or even months to be able to provision new infrastructure. So automation really allows us to be able to bridge that gap, get a little bit to market quicker to help then the applications grow a lot faster.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, now let's start talking into the meat and potatoes of this. So, obviously, there is in NSX, there's a wealth of API calls and things that you can do here. I'm even just going to go ahead and share my screen here. So, let me move this off to the side. And it would, the one of the easiest ways I think, if people do not know, is I'll bring us in here. You're looking live at my NSX manager here, and if we go in here, you go into the API documentation. I think a lot of people don't realize, number one, how simple it is to find this. Now we're running, 4100 right here, but you can find this on the website as well. But it's right there that you can pull this up, so you don't have to go searching on Google. You don't have to go searching around everywhere. It's right there in, off of your API guide and off of your NSX Manager Policy API.html. But one thing that I want to talk about, and maybe you can give us a little bit of insight here, is there's two different types of APIs on this thing. In the very beginning, when I started, there's the management plane API, and then we went to this thing called policy API. Why did we do that? What was the whole reason for it?
Yeah. So, well, if we take it back, we looked just maybe a few things before we go into that on how the API is built, which is that NSX is API first, and as you said, like you go directly from the NSX manager to the API guide. But one very important thing is that everything which is released in NSX is released first in API, and even the GUI. And that's like since you're giving trade secret, if you check what the GUI does, our GUI leverages our API. We leverage our API from the beginning. And so really NSX, the goal is that you can automate everything. You won't have something like, hey, you can configure that from the UI, but not from the API, simply because API is the backend of everything, including the UI. And as we went into the NSX story, what we want also is to make this API as easy to consume as possible. And so that goes with some standardization. So it's a REST API, which is I would say, common on the market. It also follows Open API specification. That's what you would see on the first page of this document, which allows you to generate SDK, to generate this very doc. This very doc is generated from the API. And also to do some diffs between a version Y and a version Y plus one. You can get those Open API spec. And then at the very beginning of NSXT, so that was like, I would say, think like, 3 to 4 years ago now. Yeah, something like that, probably. So we had this model on API, or this discussion on the model of the API. How can we make it as simple to consume as possible for the logical constructs? And in the past, the APIs were built around imperative API models. You create something, we give you a UUID, and then you use this UUID in the next calls. And so that works, but that means that to create a complete topology, you need to do multiple calls, and you need to refer to those UUID. So it limits the reusability and it limits the simplicity. And so what we decided while the product was still young is basically to say for the API, for the consumption of the logical constructs, like things that you will create, delete, that you will, let's make something which is optimized and which is easy to use for a customer. And so let's move to a declarative model. What is a declarative model? It's a model where you will define typically the ID of the objects. You will be also able to create complete configuration, not with a one single API call to create the segment, then another API call to create the routers, then another API call to create the firewall. But you'll be able in one file to basically push it to NSX and say, hey, create everything like that. And you will be able to reuse this file across systems. And so this idea, and now most of our APIs follows this model, the policy API. That's the one which is a front and center and that we guide customers to use. And that has a lot of benefits, as I explained. Of course, and that brings to another point, which is we are very cautious with what we do from API. API is the language which allows us to interconnect with other platforms. And so every APIs which existed at the time, those management plane APIs which are there, even though I think that was in 2.4, so yeah, 4 years ago now, we didn't want to remove them bluntly. So we deprecated them, but they are still in the product so that people with old scripts or people with old integration can still be on there. So we encourage people to go to the policy, to the declarative API. We even have a tool to move your objects from the management plane to the declarative API. And now I would think that 9 customers out of 10 are in that, probably more. But we are very cautious, as I mentioned, in removing the API. We have an API policy on the first page of this document. And so you would find the old APIs which are still there so that people can consume them and we don't block them from consumption or break their scripts.
Yeah, I think it's very important to see. I'm just actually looking at the management API right now, and you can see there's some, old deprecated commands that are here, and this is the old nomenclature, the NS groups and such that you had there, the services, and this has been changed around to be the policy model, which in my opinion is the better model, and obviously we've been going at that for a while now. So, we didn't want to, break the scripts in the past, like you said. We wanted to make sure that we gave enough time to be able to move this over to the policy. But it sounds to me like, the policy is really where you want to go from the infra. And, the documentation is very good in making sure that if there is going to be a call that's deprecated, it's not like you upgrade to the next version and it's gone. You're giving some time for people to be able to move away from those calls, and you're giving warnings, you're calling them out in the API and in the release notes also.
Yeah. So if you go to the first page of this doc, and let's do that, and that's something which I think everyone should know with NSX.
Sure.
Typically, you have this API policy changes and deprecation that we explained here on the top, and so basically, what we are saying is when we provide an API in NSX, we know people are going to use it, so they're going to base some automation on it, whether that's their own script, whether that's another product from VMware. Of course, products from VMware, they use our APIs, they use our SDKs. We have this internal integration, or it's a third-party product from another company. And so this is a production-grade product. We don't want to break an API to break consumption as much as we can. So now, from time to time, we need to deprecate some APIs. Like in the life cycle of the product, we need to change to something, let's say, more global, or there are different reasons why we would want to change that. If we can do it in a non-breaking way, like just add some fields, we would do that, and that we do that very frequently. But in some specific case, we see a limitation with a given API, so we want to be able to deprecate it, remove it, and to move to a new API. So what we do is we deprecate those APIs. So we send a notice of deprecation telling to the customers, hey, Mr. Customers, this API now, it has a replacement. You will find this replacement in the doc. And it will continue to work perfectly fine. But at some point, not sooner than 1 year, in fact, in real life, probably more, in a new release, we will remove this API. So it's a good thing if you can move to the new API. And we, in the logs also, when you create an API, of course, there you have an audit logs. We will log the deprecated APIs so that you can switch to the new ones. That's something we try to avoid as much as possible. But as mentioned, from time to time, it makes sense, and so we try to do that in the more as non-disruptively as possible. And one last field, and I'll finish on
Sure.
that, is we mark some APIs as experimental. That's relatively rare, but from time to time we publish something and it's a supported feature, but we say we are not completely sure of the API. We'd like some feedback, or we'd like people to play with it and to do that type of thing. And so we mark it as experimental, meaning it will work, it is supported, but we might change it. So we don't need to deprecate it to change it. So please be aware of that before writing any scripts. So that's this API policy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen right now because we are, ladies and gentlemen, everyone that is watching, and I want to make it very clear. If you have questions or you wanna dive deeper into a certain subject that Tomas and I are talking about, feel free to put that up in the chat. We can bring it up. But also, we will be doing some live calls. We're gonna have some real things where we do. I got a couple Postman calls and resources that I can show, and we're gonna have some fun with it. So don't run anywhere because I definitely have some things we're gonna show live calls and real things that are happening in real time. But Tomas, let's talk about. So we're talking about the API guide. We're talking about everything that's out there and what you could do with it. What are the languages that you can use? Because there's a plethora of languages. Like I know that as a network engineer, when I started doing all this stuff, I had a background of programming back in the day already. Like I learned different languages. So, reading API guides and going into programming languages really was, or scripting languages wasn't really scary. But, when you want to get started with this, it's a little intimidating because number one, a lot of these, a lot of network engineers and security engineers, they didn't go in to be coders. So when you bring up the idea of having to write code, it's pretty terrifying. So, what does NSX? What is the API? What does it support? What kind of languages do we have? Like, how can people dive into this?
Yeah, so well, the API is a REST API, and it's based on JSON. So basically, you will do some request with some HTTP verb like patch, put, get, post, and some JSON payload that you send to NSX. And that you can basically do that from any language. Like you can do that from whatever, the Python, PowerShell, any of those. They are able to send JSON, to do some HTTP request, and to do that. So whatever your preferred tooling, I would say that's the first step. We also generate SDKs from this API, and that those SDKs, we use them internally, by the way. We generate typically Java SDK, we generate Python SDK, we generate Golang SDK, and for example, we have some tools a bit more advanced on top. Like I would say that they are not like just directly coding against the API, but they are tools coming with their own logic, and we'll talk about that probably after, like Terraform. Terraform, the way it works, it uses our Golang SDK and it calls the NSX API. So we are also using those. So for people who are not super API savvy or developer savvy, I would say the simpler way is probably either to use one of those more sophisticated tools like Terraform, PowerCLI, that type of things, Ansible, or to do scripts calling the JSON and sending the API calls. That's pretty simple. And for people who have more of a developer mindset, or who are more, let's say, knowledgeable in one of those languages, they can go directly using the Java SDK, the Python SDK, that type of things, the Golang SDK. And the example of Terraform is interesting because, for instance, our GitHub is public, and so we publish those Terraform modules. They are supported, and we do that on a public GitHub, and so people, they can review the code. They can even, if they want, add to the code. We will review it, we will test it, we will validate that, but they can see how we are coding against our API. So we are eating our own dog food, like really on that. And so that's how I would approach it. Like if you're really starting, go against the JSON. There are many examples on how to do that. Look at the basic things that you want to do from the API guide. Create things from the UI and do a get. That's one of the big value also of this declarative API. Since you create the objects with your IDs and you don't have plenty of UIDs which are system generated, you can create an object from UI, do a get, and just change the IDs of the object you have created to recreate the same object, basically. And so that makes the onboarding easier for the API.
Yeah, so what I'd like to do now is like let's actually get one of the things I'm so proud of that we do on this stream is like we get into the meat and potatoes of this. So let's actually do this. Like let's look at it for now. So I'm bringing it back up on the screen, and Tomas, you're seeing as well. So
Yeah.
I mean, if we go into the inventory here, we have all these different groups and services and things that we can create, and I like making fun names of things every once in a while. So like I got this group I call Chicken. if we want to pull this information from a script, I mean, if you're trying to learn it, at first you're sitting there, okay, well, how do I interact with an API? We're going to use Postman in this case because let's throw out the idea of even doing Python or Java or anything like that. I just want to show that it's very easy to be able to read and consume this data. So if we go in here and we start looking through the policy API, we can start looking at the hierarchy, and we have, our infrastructure, we have our inventory, and look, if we're looking, we see that there's inventory in groups. Hey, that seems to make a lot of sense there. That seems to be pretty consistent with what we're even seeing in the GUI there. And we can start to dive down a little deeper, and we can start seeing, okay, well, policy API v1 infra domains, domain ID. Let's talk real quick about domain IDs. So what is a domain ID, Tomas? And why do we need that? Because we can query it and we can show it, but let's give our viewing audience a reason why we have domain.
Yeah, so why we have domain is basically to support an advanced use case which is called federation. And so here, if you run a single local manager, your domain will be default. Like by default, things which are not set are set to default. So typically, here we are not really leveraging this domain construct, so everything will be put in the domain default. Now we have this feature called federation, where on top of multiple NSX managers, you can put a global manager. And this global manager allows you to push rules to all the NSX managers below. And that can be all, that can be one, that can be a subset of anything between them. So you would be able to define those domains. We also call them region. So typically to say, hey, I have 3 data centers, Paris, London, and Singapore, and I have a domain EMEA. And so I want to push rules only, or I want to push this group only to the domain EMEA. And the API, we try to make it as consistent as possible. So it's the same API model between the GM and the global manager and the local manager. So when you create something on the local manager, you are in domain default. But from the global manager, as you imagine, you can leverage this to say multiple of those NSX environments.
Perfect. Actually, we have our first question here. So from Rob, he's asking, can you provide a link to the NSX Terraform libraries and examples? Yes, we can. We will actually send that out. Tomas, if you want to actually put it in the chat, that'd be great. We'll put it in there,
Sure,
and then
sure.
we'll also be able to put it in some show notes as well if needed.
Can I? How do I? I'm not able to put things in the chat, but
If you want to send it to me in private chat,
I can send it to you in private chat, and you can.
send it to me in private chat. I'll put it in the comments.
So I'll put both things. So we are in the Terraform documentation on the HashiCorp site, and we have the public GitHub, as I mentioned. And also, when you download NSX, you can download the Terraform provider code if you want it. Now we put it in the download page. Like most people, they get it directly from HashiCorp. This way, they don't have to compile it. It's a lot easier. But if you want to look at the code, it's there, or it's in the public GitHub.
Wonderful. Yep. And I just am putting up both of those links right now. There's the GitHub Terraform provider, and there's directly from the Terraform provider, VMware latest docs.
And one last thing. So as mentioned, even though it's on a public GitHub, it's fully supported by VMware, meaning we have engineers working on it. We have QE testing it. And so people can use it in production. They can call us if there is an issue. And what is nice in this model is that if you want to participate, you can. We'll review your code, we'll queue it, we'll validate it, so it won't be like just merge right away. But you can participate, and we'll be happy to interact. And our developers are pretty good to interact on the Terraform GitHub.
Awesome. So now we know a little bit about the domain IDs. So we know how to be able to structure things. So we're looking at policy API v1. Now we know what domains, domain ID, and groups. So basically, if you're looking at this, ladies and gentlemen out there, it's, we're specifying the policy API v1. So everything in the policy API is going to start off with policy API v1. That's pretty much across the board.
Yeah.
And then we're going into our infrastructure. That's our top level area. We start diving into the domain. We have to specify the domain ID, and then we start talking about the groups from that domain ID. Now, like Tomas was saying, we can have an EMEA area, we can have, a MER area, we can have a lot of different areas that we can divvy out these different groups under their domains. But in this case, normally when you install NSX, it's all under the default. So now that we have that, we can do something as simple as we have the base URL. So if we go back over to our NSX manager, it has an example and says, https:// policy manager. And this is just saying, insert your own policy manager, be it IP address or based on its DNS name and what it resolves to. I personally, these are things that you can set up in Postman where you can have environments or so. Hopefully I set it up on this one where I synced it over. I don't know if I did. Let me see real quick if I did. Let me do this live on. I don't want to actually share my lab password, so let me get a second just to make sure. Yep, looks like it's over and it's good to go. That's another nice check. Is I take that off screen, I put that right back, and we're good to go. I figured that out because when I started going over there and I looked at it, it said invalid
Mm.
variable. So good to know that. And then we hit send, and then boom, we get back our chicken. Now notice, I want everyone to know that this is case sensitive because this is the ID. So if I look for lowercase chicken, it's a 404 not found, and these status codes are so important when you're writing scripts and when you're doing this, is because you have to write a script that not only deals with expected output but also unexpected. And 404, just like you would have on a website that you're going to and it's unknown, you can't find it, we do the same thing. And we even show you what the response body will look at. We show you the cursor, the result count, results, sorting, sort by, blah blah blah. Like, this is the body that you can have, and what comes back. And normally it's supposed to be a 200 OK, and this is the content type. And on top of that, we show you all the different things that can happen, like additional errors that can happen. Obviously, a 404 being, not there, or it can't find it. And we give you example responses of what comes back. You can use this JSON data to then pull this information and start coming up with policy that you want to write in your DFW, or whatever you want. Like, these are all important things that you could start to use to then be able to create some really cool scripts. Or like Tomas was saying earlier, with the declarative model, where you can define 6 different groups, 7 different services, a whole bunch of policy that's there, your load balancing stuff, put it all in there, and in one singular call, it all gets done at the same time. So, Tomas, one question that I have for you is, if we're looking at this, what if we have a lot of different content that's coming back? What do we have, like, 10,000 groups? Let's say it's huge for some reason. What's this cursor thing? I think that this is one of those things that people, they might look at that are not experienced in this or understand, and might go, what the heck is a cursor supposed to be?
Yes, yes. So, well, as mentioned, we do HTTP requests. So basically, we do a GET here. And in order to maintain the performance, when you have a lot of objects, like let's say you have 60,000 objects, and you do a single GET, we don't want you to send you a huge page with the 60,000 of objects, because that negatively impact the performance. So what we will do is that we will paginate. And this cursor allows you to go from one page to the other. And so basically every 1,000 objects, we will paginate, and then we will give you a cursor, and we will say, hey, you can use this cursor to move to the next one. And so in the case where you have too many objects in the call, we will do this pagination.
Yeah, and this isn't anything that we made up. Like, this is done typically with APIs across the board from different companies. So, this is just the normal way of doing business in API calls.
Yeah, that's very common. That's part of the common framework, to use a cursor, and instead of, like, your NSX system has some scale numbers which are pretty high. So depending on we cannot. Well, it wouldn't be the most efficient to send you everything to answer one API call.
Yep.
So that's this cursor piece.
Sure. So, we talked about how to be able to get information, and we're using environment variables, and we can start. There's a lot of other things that we could talk about here. We can talk about tests and things like that. This is, and then we start. There's a whole another world that we could talk about, but I want to keep it simple. So this is just showing simply
So
how. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I'm saying go back to the UI, just to show also to people how they can get that information, because
Sure.
you've shown from the guide that you knew where to take it. But as mentioned, if you click on the 3 little dots here next to chicken at the very beginning, you can get the path. And
Yes.
one important thing of our policy API is that it's like a tree structure or folder structure. And so basically with this path, you can paste it wherever. And you can see this object, and then you can do a get of this object, see how it's defined. You can go back to the API guide and see how to create one with some other fields. But really, we have a tree structure, and we will put the objects in the different places. And that's the goal of this model. It's very easy. You create something from the API the way you like it, and you do a get, and then you just reuse this body, and you create like chicken 2 to create a group which is based on that one. And so that allows to build things in the UI. If you're starting with automation, get typically what is being sent and just send those, and and move to the automation part, the scripting part.
Absolutely. I mean, and just to be able to prove that fact, I mean, let's just go over here and we're going to go back to the policy. We're going to go back to the groups right here. And let's say we do want to create a group, create or update. Now, this could be, I've seen people actually have a little bit of confusion on this. So let's hammer in on it a little bit. What's the difference from a patch and a put, if you can simplify it, Tomas?
Yeah, so when we do put in NSX, we are modifying or creating a new object. We have a revision number, so we are more thorough in checking typically um, the version of it. So if you do a put when you get it, yeah, you will have your revision number. That's also something which is quite common, and we will make you update this revision number each time you modify the object. We can also use patch, and as mentioned, patch is like to modify some existing construct, but here we are patching like the tree, like the policy tree. Basically, we are patching the tree, so you can use it without the revision number, and I think that's the main difference in the way we consume them. And you can use patch to patch the tree in multiple places at the same time, but maybe we'll talk about that after, which is to call what we call the hierarchical API. So meaning to patch the tree and not only create one group at a time or one thing like that you put will allow you to do, but also you will be able to create, let's say you want to create 5 groups, you could do that in a single patch in the policy API.
And just to show everyone, so I'm in the patch area, and you can see under the revision here, if the revision provided in a put request is missing or stale, the operation will be rejected. So just proving the point of it's in the documentation. If you start to dive into this, you can find out from here, you can see which are the read-onlys, which are the things that are absolutely required. We can talk about expressions in a little bit, actually, because we're going to create a group, so we'll dive into that. But you can see the difference between the patches and the puts. I know that sometimes it's a little bit of a confusing thing for people when they're getting into this, is what's the difference between a post, a patch, a put? Like, all they seem kind of similar, but that's where you start diving into the documentation. It'll start to explain to you what those differences are and why you would use them. So let's talk about, okay, so we're going to do a put, and we're going to go ahead and put the group. Actually, the funny thing is in here, I kind of proved the documentation wrong. So we're going to go ahead and create Taco, and it is actually going to go ahead and create it without that revision. Now, if I wanted to update this that was already there, this is most likely going to fail because I would have
Yes,
I'm trying to put on a
yeah,
group. So that just goes to show you, ladies and gentlemen, that you can still use the put if you're creating a brand new object, but because this is new, you didn't have to put the revision in there, so it won't be rejected. So we did this, and if we go back over into the GUI real quick, we're going to see Taco. I don't know why I just did the full refresh there. That was just, yeah, that was silly of me. But anyway, Taco right there. See? Sitting right there. So this is a quick way, like, and now what you might be asking yourself is, okay, well, why? Like, I could have gone in here and add a group real quick and done all this. What's the reasoning for? Well, imagine that you got to do this for, I don't know, just you got to quickly be able to generate 60 different groups because you're onboarding a product that's going in here. You got to create all the groups for all the different segments. If it's a segmented application, it's microservices enabled, all that good stuff. It's from a monolith application. You got to create all of the groups. You got to create some of the services that are there. You got to create some segments and some routing that's involved with that. Going through the GUI and having to type this out 50 times and making sure that you put the right tags and the scope and everything like that, human error starts to be a factor. And this is where coding is the biggest saving grace in the world. Would you agree, Tomas?
Yeah, yes, of course. Well, as soon as you need to do something repetitive, it's nice to be able to automate. That if you do something once, or if you are designing something, yeah, UI is pretty nice. If you want to look at something, UI is pretty nice. If you want to create 20,000 same thing, it's good to have a way to automate it and to just click on launching the script once.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I always hear people when they're starting their journey of automation, they go, well, yeah, we're going through this in painstaking detail of going through and explaining what every single little thing is. The next thing we're going to talk about, hint, hint, is expressions. Oh man, yeah, I can do this through the GUI, and I can probably make 50 objects in, if I sat there and brute force it out, maybe I could do it in an hour or something like that, or 30 minutes, and make sure it's error free. and everyone knows that when you're in an enterprise or where you're working, people are tapping you on the shoulder, they're coming up to you, you're getting calls, and human error can happen. It's a natural thing. It's going to take me 4 hours to write a script. Well, guess what? That's the first time that you wrote that script, but then the next time you write, it's going to take you 3.5 hours. And then after that, it's going to take you three, then two, then one. Then next thing you know, you can start using these scripts that you already wrote, make minor adjustments, and you can do a lot really, really quickly. So don't let the initial nervousness of how long it's going to take you to read the API documentation. Once you become more comfortable, these things all of a sudden become really quick to pump out, and you start finding other things that you do in your day that you can automate, and then you're getting a lot more done in a day than you ever would have done if you would have just stuck to doing nothing but the GUI. So let's talk about the expression here. So Tomas, why do we have this thing called an expression? I mean, I can see here in this example, we have a member type of virtual machine. I see the value of taco tag, blah, blah, blah. So just to show people visually, when we go in here, we edit this group. This is like me going in here under view members, membership criteria, and creating all this. So, we have all these different matching criteria. Why do we have all this? I know this is a show about automation, but let's dive a little bit deeper into the
Yeah, so
expression side.
I think actually that's interesting because that's very related to automation. So as mentioned, NSX brings value by allowing you to automate the creation of your networking security services backing the application and go faster. But also it does it in an intelligent way. And we don't want automation for automation. What I mean is, as I mentioned also, today most modern product they have APIs and you can automate against it. But here, what this group allows you to do is to regroup VMs based on their attributes. And we've seen the different attributes. That's what you define in the expression. All the VM tagged web, all the VM tagged app, and all the VM tagged DB. And it might seem a bit counterintuitive, but that allows us to limit the automation that we will have to do against NSX. Because now, let's say we were doing something based on IPs. And NSX, as you know, it gives you the ability to create firewalling rules, security rules between VMs, no matter if they are connected to the same network or different networks. But if we do something based on IPs, we would need to automate these rules based on IPs. We would need to get the IP of the VM and push a rule based on the IP and then remove rules. And so what we allow you to do here in the group is to say, okay, I define those groups once, maybe in an automated manner or even in a UI manner. And then those groups, thanks to those criteria, the VM, they will land into that group. You have a web VM, you just need to tag it web. And so, and we see multiple customers do that where they define their firewalling rules, they define their groups, and then they define a framework where each VM, for instance, has prod, a state, something like, is it from the DMZ? Is it from prod, dev, test? Is it from this department? So basically, they define a number of attributes which define this VM, and they use tag, and then they make it land in the right groups, and they have the right policy, and that allows them to have something which is very agile, but simplify their automation, because they don't create new rules each time, don't create new groups each time. They just use NSX to label the VM. They add tags to the VM so that it falls in the right place. So what I'm saying is it's built for automation so that it's easier to deploy the application. It's not just like taking something which is like, let's say, not thought for that and adding an API on top. And that's the goal.
So to recap, what you're talking about is a framework here that you can do, that you set up the policy. It could be even outside the mindset of how many VMs you're going to have, the type of VMs, but we could set up a framework with the groups and the services and the scopes, and we can put all that stuff in even before the workload moves in there. And then we can start taking something like, if we had this, I know it's down, but we could take this and we knew that this was a web server and we called them web. We can add this item in here and add a scope if we wanted to. And as we start bringing in those VMs or those containers or whatever, that it's automatically going to start utilizing the policy that we laid down right in the very beginning. We don't even have to wait. We don't have to wait to move the workloads in. We can have everything set up for it beforehand.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's,
And
I think that's a real powerful thing that you can do there. And you can plan that all out with your automation strategy. Where if we had in a world where we're using some type of onboarding system where people want to build their own VMs in a self service manner, they can choose this is going to be a web server, it's going to be a development server, it's going to be whatever it is. And it'll automatically get tagged, get created through something like, let's say, Aria Automation, dropped into the environment. And then it all of a sudden just picks up the policy that's in our distributed firewall.
yeah,
That's pretty powerful.
yeah, that's very powerful, and that allows also to adapt the tool to the different consumption model of the customers. And I think we're going to double down on that, which is that in some organization, uh, it will be okay typically to allow the user to create some rules, to create some groups. There might be some rules on top defined by the security team, which of course are on top and define everything, but you empower the users to create their own rules, their own groups, and to have this consumption of the networking and security services. In some other organization, because it's divided differently, the rules they would be set maybe more statically or automated by another team. And the people deploying the application, they will need to make sure that those applications they enforce those rules, they are aligned to that. And that's where typically you could have a fairly static rule set, a fairly static topology, but use the capabilities of NSX of labeling, putting tags on the VMs, or using the name or the properties of the OS or the different properties of the VMs to make sure that the delivery of compute, the delivery of the application can be done with the right networking and the right security, and at the same time divide the responsibility clearly between teams, and and define the level of automation of your environment.
Absolutely. And just in this, like, now let's, because we can talk about one topic a lot. I mean, I just want to bring this out into this. Just isn't about security. I mean, we're talking about also network provisioning too. Like, look at in the example here. I have this, tier 0 router A. I call it in the 3 tier 0 right here. This is one of my favorite ones. If I want to go ahead and create, let's say, a brand new tier 1, this is how simple it is. I'm going to call this thing a green router. Now, let's say we're not going to go through the API again. I mean, if we want to, we can, of course, but I showed the example in a group. But we're using that same base URL. So notice how I don't even have to change things. This is the power of using environments in Postman. But I'm going through that policy API v1 infra tier 1 green router. And the only thing I have to do here is define what tier 0 path is. Now, as Tomas told us earlier, I can go in here and I can go and look at copy the path to the clipboard and come in here if I just want to do it rudimentary and go, here it is. Here's the path of that guy. Perfect. Cool. So I go in here, paste that in, and I hit the send button, and that's it. I'm done. Now if I go back in here, I have green router created. And it's automatically connected. That was one quick command where instead of me having to hit add tier 1, type it all out, blah, 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 I have to choose the tiers, the tier 0 gateway, got to choose the edge, blah, blah, blah. No, I didn't need to do that. I was done in a heartbeat. So that's also not only building a policy quickly, but now we're talking about actually building networks. Like, imagine having to, being able to put a physical router out there that quickly. You can't do that, but with NSX and using automation, I can start to expand the network out in the segments in real time that quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And it's done around also the architecture is thought around that. Like, as you can see, you have those two levels, so tier 0, tier 1s, and with the idea that we can have some tier 0s which will be connected to the outside world. They will probably be more static because you'll do BGP with your physical switches or that type of things. You can still create VRF and have some flexibility there, but traditionally they would be a bit more static. And then you create those tier 1s below, those basically application router or tenant router, and you just connect them to the tier 0, as mentioned. And NSX will take care of everything, which is route advertisement, that type of things. You don't need to configure BGP or SPF. You can just choose which routes to advertise. And that allows to create tier 1s to delete them very, very quick. And without going into too much detail, the architecture with some edge node where you create and you delete those router, so you don't need to create a new VM each time, allows for some heavy automation that was thought like to create container environment, to create OpenStack environments at the time, or the Aria Automation environments at the time, where you would have a lot of churn of creating deletion of those tier 1 routers.
Absolutely. And I think that's also important to know is, we kind of gloss over some of these things. So I'm glad that you bring up some of this information is like the connection of the tier one to tier zero. Notice how in that payload, I'm not defining IP addresses or point to point links to /30. I'm not trying to define, all that information and be able to set up route redistribution yet. I just needed to clearly create nothing but a tier one that connected off, and it's a distributed router that's there. We can elaborate on more if we want to with scripting, where we can start adding in services. We can start adding in certain types of route redistribution and such. All those things could be added. That's the flexibility of the API, but it could be just as simple as doing this. So I always recommend when people are trying to write scripts out, and in my opinion, this is like the scripting that leads to self-service, and then we're going to talk about infrastructure as code shortly, is you can test out your logic using these API calls, figure out what you want to do, draw out in your mind or on a piece of paper or in Visio how you want to actually, how would you walk through this process, and then you start writing that code. And this is the framework of each one of these calls that you then build into your Python script or your PowerShell script, and then you can automate through your whole process. Or you can do the declarative model like we were talking about earlier and put all of those calls in one singular call, send it off, and boom, everything's just created.
Exactly.
So, Tomas, we've been talking a lot about self-service, and we hinted about Terraform. Talk to me about Terraform.
Yeah, of course. So as mentioned, so we provide the API. We make this API as simple as consume as possible. But then there are a number of tools on top of NSX, and so those tools, they are different. They have different philosophy, and so Terraform is one of them. So it's a DevOps tool. Maybe you can share the Terraform page that you shared, or
I'm actually just bringing it up right now. So while you're
okay,
talking,
perfect. And so what we do for typically those tools like Terraform or Ansible, which are open source, is that we listen to our customers. So we don't have a favorite or anything like that, but we see what people want to do. And Terraform is an extremely popular tool to provision infrastructure. It's also declarative. So you define your intent in a file, a Terraform file, and then you can basically apply this Terraform file to your infrastructure where it will create complete topologies. So it has some behaviors which are very close to our API, to our declarative API, but it also is useful to provision things, for instance, against the vCenter or against other VMware product or against other non-VMware product, and to mix them together. And so what we did is put together a Terraform provider. So in order to expose the NSX capabilities. So you have your NSX which is deployed. You will download this Terraform provider, and from there, you are able to configure NSX through Terraform. And the way Terraform works is around two main constructs. So you have data sources and you have resources. Resources are things created by Terraform, and data sources are things which are Terraform learns from the environment. And so depending on, let's say, that's a very good example. For instance, NSX has a number of constructs which are pre-created or that you might have created already, like the context profile, the services that you're using in your DFW. You don't want Terraform to recreate an HTTP service because you will use it for a firewall rule. So you would use a data source for that. But when you want to create a firewall rule, your Terraform will allow you to do that, and that will be the resource for that. And so our Terraform provider really covers the consumption of NSX, the logical space, like the tier 0, tier 1 segment, so that you can provision and deploy applications. What's interesting also is that it works for local manager on-prem. It works for global manager, those federated environment I was talking about previously. And it works also for the customer on VMware Cloud on AWS. You would have some little differences between them, like for instance, in terms of authentication, but we will use the same resources and data sources. We will specify when they are applicable so that people can use the same script. And so typically for your firewall rules, for instance, you could have a Terraform file, which you would use both for on-prem and for VMC on AWS, because it's backed by the same API. So that's a very
yep.
powerful tool, and that's a very deployed tool. I think.
I think Terraform is powerful, and I think the reason why is because you hear a lot of developers wanting to use Terraform to be able to define their whole policy when it comes to public cloud, when it comes to their Kubernetes clusters and such. They want to be whatever that they're out there doing. They want to be able to define. And the cool thing about Terraform is it will keep track of the state. And why that's important is when it wants to go and create, let's say, a security policy. If you run your Terraform script again and that stuff was already created, it knows the state and it'll query against the NSX manager in this case and know, oh, it's already there and it's already been created. I don't need to adjust this, so I'm not going to create duplicates of the same thing. And if you make a change, it will tell you the adjustments that are going to happen, and then it'll go off and do it. So you're wherever you're holding that state file, it has an idea of exactly what is going on in the NSX manager, and it knows the state of it. Well, why this is important is when you start putting this into your agile principles of how you're deploying your application, how you maybe need to expand it as it's growing, or you put it in CI/CD pipeline or so. These are the tools that developers want to use. They want to not only use self-service, but they want to be able to use their Terraform to be able to do policy management and creation of resources. So the whole goal here is for people to understand is you have to be able to write code or deal with whatever your customers or your if you're a consultant of some sort, or if you're a developer or wherever, and you're in IT and you're writing this type of stuff for your developers and your product owners, you have to be able to bring in whatever way they want to consume it and have a way of making sure they don't conflict over each other, they don't tackle their own policy, and we could start talking into federation, we could start talking into multi-tenancy a little bit if we want to, because Tomas knows one or two things about that. But yeah, this is the cool thing is we're not limiting you in VMware in like you only can use Python or you can only use Postman or you can only use Java. We give you every single opportunity to be able to automate this in whatever works for your business.
Exactly. And just to complete that, we have a number of integration on top of NSX. And so in some way, Terraform is allowing you to directly consume the platform, directly consume the NSX constructs, the tier 1, the tier 0. You have some which will bring more logic on top. Like for instance, Kubernetes, or for instance, Aria Automation, but the idea is the same. It's your user wants to use a tool X, and this tool X, because it's meant to provision infrastructure or application, requires some networking, security, and services. And so we build the integration between these tool X. So Aria Automation is a good example. You create some blueprints. In those blueprints, you define the compute that you want, the VMs, the containers, and also the networking and the security. And the networking and the security is then realized on NSX. There is a native integration between both of them. And so really the idea is that we want to give choice in terms of consumption on top, and so that can be VMware, non-VMware. That is a very open ecosystem, and we try to support what makes the most sense. And Terraform, I think, is a very good example of that.
Yeah. So Tomas, now we've talked about self-service, we talked about infrastructure as code, but I've been hinting at it. So what about multi-tenancy? Is there anything that you would want to share? I mean, I've been sharing most of the screen, but is there something you want to talk about with multi-tenancy?
Yes. So I'm happy to talk about that because that's our newest thing. So give me 1 second so I pull it.
Sure, no problem.
Okay. So now, yes, let me share that up. And so share screen. Okay.
So just as Tomas is bringing that up, as we're making our way through this, if anybody has any questions out there about automation or Python or the best ways to be able to approach this, or how you can do it, or maybe you're running into a situation at your job right now where you are, having debates within your team, feel free to ask us, because this is stuff that myself, I'm very passionate, and I know Tomas is as well. And it looks like he's got his stuff up here. So let's switch over to Tomas.
Yeah. So you see my screen, you see the NSX manager. It's exactly almost like the ones that you were showing. So now what's great with automation, as I said, you can do everything in NSX from API. So you can automate your NSX system. And so that allows the team managing the NSX system to basically do some repetitive tasks or do some templated tasks much more easily. And that's a great tool for that. So that's a great tool for the NSX admin, for the security admin, for the networking admin. Now, one of the points is also how can I extend this consumption to multiple users, multiple teams working in parallel? And there is one way that we discussed, which is with something on top. And that's a very good way. Like we say, my users, they don't access NSX directly. They access Aria Automation. They access Cloud Director. They access VMware Integrated OpenStack or Kubernetes, like one of those platforms where they will be able to consume networking and security backed by NSX. But they don't have the full-fledged features of NSX. They have what the abstraction makes available to them for their use case. And so what we see and what is typically organization where they want to segment different users having their own firewall rules, their own VMs, their own things, but having access to the system in order to do that. And so what we've been adding in the last version of NSX 4.1.0 is multi-tenancy in the product, multi-tenancy in the management plane. So before you could have multiple users in parallel on the same system with workload isolated. But here the idea is you can have multiple users configuring the system with workload isolated. And so here I am the admin of the system. As the admin, I can do pretty much everything in my environment, but I can do something new, which is that I can create projects. And I have those projects. We can create one right now. So let me show you demo project. And this demo project, I will allocate a tier 0 and I will allocate an edge cluster. So basically, as the admin, I am the one who installed the system. Of course, your users, they are not going to uninstall your system because that will impact the other tenant. And I am the one also defining what resources they will leverage and how they will connect to the outside world. That's what the tier 0 is used for. But once I've done that, I can create a project like that. And this project is a tenant. And this tenant has objects of its own. And so typically, it will have its own segments, its own tier 1 gateways, its own firewall rules. And what's even more interesting, its own VMs. It will only be able to apply policies to the VM connected to the networks of the project. And so if we go in one other of my project, you see, here in my project marketing, I have a VM 2. And so that means that when I do distributed firewall rules, when I do gateway firewall rules, or when I do networking, I am able to deploy my own application to have access to NSX directly, to the different features, to the tooling also for troubleshooting like traceflow, the alarms. But I am not able to impact other users sharing the same platform. And the way it's done, and let me show you, here I am the admin, so I can switch from one project to the other. But here I am typically, let's say, marketing admin. I was in the marketing project. And so let me log as this user. Here I am the admin of the marketing project, and the only thing I can consume is the marketing project. And so I can do my consumption from UI and API in my project. I have my segments, my tier 1s. When I create a tier 1, marketing tier 1, 2, I can connect it to the tier 0, which were allocated to me, the edge clusters, which were allocated to me. And so I have flexibility to do my consumption from UI or my automation to create things in bulk, but I am isolated from the rest of the customers. And so I know that I won't impact my neighbor, or even better, my admin knows that I won't impact my neighbor. I won't be able to apply a firewall rule to their VMs or that type of things. And even better, we have some constraint mechanism because, as we said, with automation, you can create a lot of objects. So we can create some quotas. And so now let's limit our marketing user. So limit marketing, and I can set some limits, like basically I can say, hey, for the segments, you are entitled to 5 segments only. And so now I will assign that to the marketing project. And so I can limit how many things they can do, so that as the admin, I give them a lot of flexibility. They create their own stuff. They automate it the way they want it, with the language they want it. They do everything that they want. And they have this full stack of networking and security to back it up. But they are still limited by the things that I'm checking. And so here, I'm checking the number of segments. We have one which is created here. Oh, sorry. Up. We have one which is created. We are entitled to 5, and so I can check the status here also as the admin of that. So that allows me to segment the system also from an authentication authorization point of view, and to allow the customers to consume it more directly the way that they want to, also to use the tools that they want in order to use that. And so just to Um,
So I think that to reiterate some of this, and let's tie it back to what we've been talking about here. NSX has always been able to do this network virtualization and this security. So like the level that we've gotten there has been amazing. But now we're bringing this change of game because you beforehand. Let's talk about if you're a current network administrator right now with the physical firewall. Usually those tickets are coming to you and then you're having to log into that device, or you're running the script and you're the one that's going in there and having to make changes because you want to make sure that whatever policies or whatever groups, whatever things are going in there, you're not creating excess amounts of overlapping groups like 18 RFC 1918 groups or something, or a bunch of maybe the firewall rule that they requested was actually in there and there was a misconfiguration in their application. We had to have a buffer there between us to make sure that we were using the resources within the device as efficiently as possible. Now with multi-tenancy, we're putting the power at the end user, at the developer, at the product owner, that they can have, and we can set quotas to make sure that they don't go nuts, but they have full control over their environment without us having to get in the way.
exactly.
That's a powerful thing that we can do now, and that's cloud experience right there. That's your ability to be able to, like, in an old place that I worked at, get IT out of the way. We want to make sure that we're not taking 6 weeks or 8 weeks because we're all busy. But if they can use their Terraform or their Python libraries and be able to adjust their inventory or create their VMs and create their policy and create anything that they need without ever having to tap IT on the shoulder, that's empowering. I mean, that's great. Like we're now enabling them to innovate and not holding them back from innovating.
Exactly, and that's really the direction we want to go. Like NSX is super powerful in terms of services, networking services, security services. It can, and plus it brings those at the VM level because, as we discussed with the group, we have this specific place, this special place where we're at the VM level. And how do we make that available? Maybe to more users than just the networking admin, or with less layers than with some abstraction on top. And so that's what we do with multi-tenancy. That's what we're working on to make it easier for people to come to automate. I deploy my application. My application needs networking, it needs security, it needs load balancer. I should be able to do absolutely everything, but I do that only in my context where I don't impact your application, Andrew, or the production application, which is not supposed to be impacted. And
Yeah,
that's
and let's go wild here, Tomas. Like, what if we even had like a CI/CD pipeline where you had somebody that can go and we built a front end, or you used via Aria Automation or something like that to be able to request the rule set of what you want. It gets put into a manifest, uploaded into, let's say, a GitLab or a GitHub, goes all the way up to the security team, and then they can hit OK, and it will deploy it out to their segment. So you allow governance, you allow compliance to still be able to look at it, deploy it out to their tenant. It fits within their quotas. It makes security happy, compliance happy, and they're not messing with anybody else's strategy. Boom. I mean, look at that. Now you save time. You can't tell me that, because some people get a little worried about automation. They go, well, how are we going to be able to keep up with compliance? How are we going to be able to keep up with governance? You can. Automation does not mean you can't also adhere. Actually, I would argue that you can adhere to governance and compliance standards better than what you could do in a manual format.
Yeah, because you typically have clearly defined what you want to do. You can go back on the trace, like you have the intent file which is defined. You will be able to catch any drift very easily. That's the power also of all this intent-based system. Once you have defined the intent, if for whatever reason the system is changing, you just reapply the intent and it will bring back the system to that. That's typically what Terraform would do, for instance, since we talked about Terraform. And yeah, that's a pretty powerful tool to define exactly what you want and to make sure the system is aligned with that.
So we've had a really good talk here, Tomas, and I think we're getting to the point where we're going to start to wrap it up. So the last thing I will ask you is, I think we've done a pretty good job of showing people the options and things. If you were to give advice to somebody that is brand new into this, they're a network administrator or an engineer, or they're a security engineer, or maybe they're the hypervisor side of the world, and they're getting into NSX and they need to start on this automation journey, what is your secret to success to start to get into this?
So I think I would take it step by step. And as mentioned, like the UI is a great way to enter the API, and that might seem counterintuitive, but as I mentioned, as we showed, basically, you create something from the UI, and thanks to the declarative API, you can look at how it looks like from the API. And technically, one tip is even the UI is sending the API call, so you can look at like what is being sent, and you'll see exactly the call there. And so create what you want from the UI, check that it works, and then you can move that to the API very easily thanks to the declarative model, and you can start that way. And then after that, once you are uh, you pick your language of choice. With JSON, you can do pretty much any language, as I said, to create the environment. Once you're more comfortable, you can start doing things which are more complex. And that's how I would do things. And don't hesitate to use the hierarchical API. I think we'll probably put some links to that. But the fact that you can create in one call in NSX network tier one firewalling, it means also that NSX will take care of the dependency. Well, one of the little complexity of automation is, in order to say that my segment needs to connect to a router, the router needs to be there. Otherwise, so I need to sequence my calls. NSX removes that with the hierarchical API. You put in one call that you want a router, you want the segment, and they need to be connected, and NSX will figure it out. So don't hesitate to leverage this hierarchical API because that's very powerful.
So I want to point out something, and I just was actually looking at it, looking for it while we were talking here. It's like, look, you can go to developer.vmware.com, and there's a bunch of different things that you can look at. There's lots of scripts, and that this isn't just for NSX, but there's just a bunch of different things that people have written. Code is out there. I mean, these are code samples and Power CLI examples, which we didn't really even talk about Power CLI, but there's a lot of there. But things that can pull off from not only NSX but the AOB, from Aria Automation, Aria ops, operations, you name it, everything that's out there. There are scripts people are writing, people are out there. Don't be afraid to write code. Don't be afraid. That's I think my last thing that I would say to people is, commonly I hear when people are getting into automation, not only that they don't know where to start, but they feel like their code might not be pretty enough, or it might not be, it's going to be put up there and people are going to make fun of how badly their code style is, or it's not, Pythonic enough, or Python, however you want to put it. I've heard all these different things. Don't be afraid. Put it up there. Put it out there. Use it. Test it. Give it a shot. Get input from other people. I'm telling you, the more and more that you do this, the more and more you will feel comfortable with it. And then I guarantee you, it will spark an interest in you to want to learn more about Python. And then you can make code that is more Pythonic. You can write better Power CLI. You can write better routines and functions and things out there. But give it a shot. Start learning it now, because I'm telling you, this will save your time, your life, your your world eventually in your IT career. This is where it's at.
And I put in the chat also, we have a GitHub where we have examples not only on the API, but on the different tooling that we support. And so don't hesitate to give a look at that. Basically, we have like how to create a free tier app with hierarchical API. Boom. How to create a free tier app with Terraform. How to create a free tier app with Aria Automation. And so we show you typically how to use those different tools to achieve something. And you can reuse the code, you can modify it. You'll see playing with it, as Andrew was saying, it's very easy to iterate. It's easier to take something and to iterate on top of it to learn than to basically set from the beginning, oh, I need to be super Pythonic, or yeah, that's.
Yeah, I've seen this actually. This is one of the ones I was looking for. I'm glad that you had it. So I put it up in the chat, and I also have it up here showing on the screen. This is a perfect area where this is a PowerShell, a Power CLI script that's running that. This creates a 3-tiered app. So it'll create the tier 0. You can see the functions, create tier 1s, create the segments, create the groups. This is cool stuff that you could do. This is stuff that you can write, that yet again, you're saving time and effort. You're building out these things, and the code's out there. Use this as an example. Use it in your labs and use it in your small environments to be able to figure out how this, and then you can start to learn what these things mean, and you can start to edit it to what you want to do. These are tons and tons of resources out here that people have done the time so that you can feel comfortable with writing code. And I'm telling you, like, if I have any advice for anyone that's getting into the industry, it doesn't matter what it is. Learn a little bit of coding, learn a little bit of scripting, and learn how to be able to implement that into your day-to-day life in your enterprise, or as a consultant, or as a partner, or whatever. This is super important. So thanks, Tomas. I appreciate you showing me this last bit. I was actually searching for it frantically in the background, so I'm glad that you had it. I got to say that, I love automation. I love anything about it. I've always been, like I said, I started off way early as a code nut, a long time ago. Then I got into networking, and then I went into coding found its way back into my life in some way, shape, or form. So it's ironic, but we have gone through a bunch. I would love to go through some other subjects that, but we'll have to hold off on that in a little bit in the future. We'll have some
Mm.
conversations. We'll have you definitely back on, but I would love to talk to you one of these days. A little bit of a hint, a teaser, and I know that we haven't talked about it, but I'm going to put you on the spot. But we should really talk about NSX V to T migrations, and we should really dive deep into why we're doing things like that. But that's a whole nother show. But we would love to have you back on for that.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's a bit related because in many cases it helps to be able to automate a few things here and there when you're doing migrations. But yes, happy to talk about that.
Excellent. Well, Tomas, thank you for being on. You were on the second show that we officially did. Next week, just for a hint for people, we are going to be doing a show all on the NSX Edge. So we're going to be talking about the best ways to be able to implement it into the environment. What are the best practices? How do you do it in a multi-site, or how you do it in federation? Talking about BGP, OSPF, all the different things that are revolved around doing it in its best practices. We're actually going to crack open the design guide, and we're going to start talking about the good, the bad, the ugly. So that's coming up next week, and we're going to do that, I believe, at 2:30 time frame. But Tomas, thank you very much again for
Thank you.
being on here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you,
Excellent.
Andrew.
All right. I'm going to wrap up the show. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining in on the Twitch channel, VMware NetSec. Like I said, we're going to be doing this hopefully every week or every other week as we're going down the line. So thank you, and we'll see you next time, actually next week at 2:30. Bye-bye.